Glad you're here. If you got a Bible, meet me in Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8. We've been working our way through the life of Jesus from beginning to end over the course of this year. And it's part of a 2-year discipleship initiative that we as a church have called Kingdom Come, where we're challenging 100% of us to ask the question, what would it look like for the goodness and grace of Jesus to increasingly rule every day and every area of every heart? And there are several different components of that we revisit from time to time. One of them we talked a little about last week. So the idea that if the goodness and grace of Jesus is going to rule increasingly every day over every heart, that has something to do with what we do on Monday through Saturday, not just how we invest our Sunday mornings. We've talked before about finding a vocation rather than just an occupation, a calling from God, not just something that occupies us for 40 or 50 or 60 hours every week. And that there's a connection to your calling, not just my calling, and the overall plan for flourishing of the entire world that God has from Fort Worth to Uzbekistan, right? And everywhere in between. So you could see our update on Uzbekistan at kingdomcomefw.com if you didn't get a chance to see that last week. But there was also a 30-second survey that we asked you to do last week that's part of a plan to help us all connect those dots together. Here and for a few of us, perhaps there. So if you didn't get a chance to do that survey, or if you got a chance and just didn't do that survey, you can take the next 30 seconds, if you would, hit that QR code and multitask for 30 seconds during this next opening illustration, and we'll meet back together in Mark chapter 8. Sound like a plan? All right, Mark chapter 8. So at some point in the early years of 1800s, Thomas Jefferson sat down with his copy of the Bible, a pair of scissors, and some glue. He was concerned with some stuff that he heard in the churches that he visited and some stuff that he saw in the lives of the Christians that he knew, and he decided that he would do something about it. He determined that most of the stuff that he read in his Bible concerning Jesus wasn't livable for a person like him in the real life, and that other parts weren't likable in the real world. So he just started to cut. He cut out the miracles, cut out anything supernatural, anything that claimed that Jesus was more than just a great moral guide, anything that conflicted with Thomas Jefferson's vision of the good life. In fact, you can see what he came up with at the Smithsonian Institute in D.C. at the Museum of American History. He called it the life and morals of Jesus of Nazareth. And he ended up with a vision or a version of Jesus' life that Jefferson felt like he could live, and a version of Jesus that Jefferson liked. At one point, he said that he had picked all of the diamonds out of the dunghill. Now, it probably won't surprise you to hear me say that I think that what Thomas Jefferson did was a miss. What might be a little more uncomfortable for you is to hear that I've got my own version of this. And I suppose that probably you do too. We just don't use scissors or publish it for other people to see. We like Jesus, at least the parts that we like. Love your neighbor, that's pretty good stuff. As long as I get to define love and I get to define neighbor. Don't judge, and we're definitely in favor of that. Certainly for other people should not do that. We're firm on that. Care for the poor, we agree. As long as it doesn't cost me too much, as long as I don't have to personally get close. See, we get to things that challenge us when we read through the life of Jesus, sometimes things that conflict with us or even contradict some of the things that we want for us, the dreams that we're chasing, the direction that we've aimed our life. And we don't scissor it out of the Bible, but we tend to consciously or sometimes subconsciously cut it out of our life. All of us are tempted to construct a version of Jesus that we're comfortable with. The commands that feel livable from where we are, that connect with what we want out of life. As long as Jesus agrees with us, we all tend to really like Jesus. When he calls us to something that doesn't feel livable right now, doesn't align with our vision for the world, that tends to be when things start to unravel. we don't necessarily hit the unfollow button, but we're at least tempted to put Jesus on mute. That's exactly where we find the disciples at a turning point in Mark chapter 8. And here's what we're going to see over the next few weeks. We will never become like Jesus if we only follow him where we like. We will never become like Jesus if we only follow him where we like. So last week, Jay talked about the feeding of the 4,000, the importance of remembering. This week, we're going to see Peter get it right for a second. But right in between those two stories, there's a story about a guy who can't see but wants to see really bad. And Jesus, in this story, put some spit on the guy's eyes. Kind of gross. He says to the man, "Can you see?" The guy says, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." It's one of the strangest answers in the Bible, but it's important. The guy's saying, "Look, I want to see." And in that moment, he's saying, I think I can kind of see, but I still can't really see what I feel like I'm supposed to see. You see that? Does that sound like anybody else you know in these stories we've been looking at? Sound like anybody else you know in the room today? Jesus, I want to see. I can't see. Well, I can kind of see, but I'm still not sure that I see what I could see if you'd finish this work in me. If that sounds at all familiar to you, this is a pretty hopeful place for us to be today. Look at Mark chapter 8, beginning at verse 27. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others, one of the prophets." Jesus and his disciples continue their walk away from the guy who can kind of see, and Jesus asks him a question. It feels a little different from all of the other questions that he's asked up to this point. Up to this point, most of Jesus' questions have been directed at the disciples about the disciples to teach them how to depend on him in everyday life. And he's still getting ready to do that, but from a different angle than they're used to. Here he doesn't ask them about them. Here he asks them about him. And it's interesting. The word on the street about Jesus in their day is pretty similar to the word on the street about Jesus in our day, every day. They say, look, some people say you're John the Baptist. Some people say maybe Elijah, maybe one of the prophets, maybe even the prophet that God promised Moses. What do all of those guys have in common? All of those men were great men who spoke for God in one way or another. The disciples say, hey, word on the street, Jesus, you're a great man. In fact, word on the street is that you probably speak from God. Maybe even speak for God. Good moral teacher, miracle worker, strong leadership gifts. I mean, they like you, Jesus. They really like you. And Jesus looks at the guys, verse 29. Says, but what about you? Who do you say I am? Stop just for a second. This is a really important question, isn't it? This is the eternal version of a DTR. Remember those? Define the relationship. High school students, that's still a thing. Guy and girl start hanging out, maybe even a big group for a while. After a while, the group starts fading away and you realize it's just you and her, or him and you. You're still finding yourselves together. And someone starts to wonder between the two of you if you're in the friend zone and going to stay there, or if it's going someplace else. And you maybe try to bring it up innocently. Like, yeah, it's funny. Like, our friends are all teasing me. Word on the street is that you're my girlfriend. Isn't that funny? And she says, like, yeah, funny. Who do you say that I am? And when she asks the question, she's not asking about her identity. I say that you are Carrie, goofball. Like, what's wrong with you? She's saying, who am I to you? That's what Jesus is asking here. And Peter gives an answer. You see it in the last half of that verse. Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Peter says, Jesus, you're the unique one sent from God. You're the center of God's plan for all of humanity. You're the snake crusher. You're the life giver. You're the promise keeper. Jesus, you are God's final king. Okay, so pop quiz class. Right answer or wrong answer? Right answer, right? That is absolutely who Jesus is. But it raises a question, why, if that's the right answer, does Jesus do what he does in verse 30? Look at verse 30. Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. I mean, I know I'm supposed to be the professional here. Isn't that exactly the opposite of what Jesus wants his followers to do? I mean, look, every week there are a bunch of you that come here who don't follow Jesus for one reason or another, right? Either you're still exploring Jesus or you're curious about Jesus. Maybe you're interested in Jesus or interested in someone who's interested in Jesus. A lot of reasons. Maybe your neighbor invited you and you just wanted to be nice. And I love that. You are always welcome here. You don't have to believe before you can belong here. But doesn't this surprise you? Like, isn't this kind of the whole Christian thing? Know who Jesus is and tell other people about him? It seems like Jesus is giving the wrong answer in response to the right answer. Check it out. Jesus knows something about Peter that Peter doesn't yet know about Peter, but is about to find out. Peter gets the right answer on the quiz, which it turns out to be dangerous because now he thinks he fully understands Jesus. But in reality, Peter has been wanting to see, and he's starting to see, but he still can't quite see all there is to see. Peter sees just enough about Jesus to take who Jesus is and map it onto what Peter wants. Peter has a version of Jesus that he can live with, a version of Jesus that he likes, based on everything he assumes about what his answer means. The problem is, that isn't the whole Jesus. Peter just sees trees walking around. And if that's the way you see, it's dangerous for you to walk, much less try to show other people the way home. Keep reading, verse 31. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Jesus begins to show them the peace that they couldn't see coming. Now, two things in what Jesus says here would have run all over them. Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. They were familiar with that term. In fact, that was Jesus' favorite term for himself. It comes right out of Daniel chapter 7, where Daniel sees a vision of a person who comes to the earth with authority and with glory and power and an everlasting kingdom. So when Peter hears the Son of Man, Peter's all in. He's hearing victory. He's hearing power, revolution. He's hearing everything that he longed for God to do in his world and in his life and for his life in real time. But notice that's not the end of the sentence. Jesus says the Son of Man must suffer, must be rejected, must be killed, must rise again. That little word must is doing some heavy lifting in this passage. In fact, it shows up twice. Jesus is saying suffering, death, What looks to everyone watching like defeat aren't just a possibility. They're the whole mission. They're the whole thing, the whole agenda for why I've come. And this is where Peter's categories for Jesus start falling apart. Like, he's got a plan for a powerful Messiah. He's got a category for victory and glory and power and success and influence. He doesn't have a category for a king who wins by suffering. Peter knows Daniel 7. What he doesn't see is that before the Messiah wears the crown of Daniel 7, he'll wear the thorns of Isaiah 53. And Peter doesn't like that. He wants a Messiah that wins the way that empires win. He only has categories for the kind of greatness that Jesus is dismantling. Peter has a vision of what kind of Messiah Jesus should be, the kind of king Peter wants him to be, one who will make his life work all the time, one who will protect him and the people who he loves all the time, fix whatever frustrates him, secure the future that he wants. He's after the kind of king who will bless the version of life that Peter's already planned out in his head. How do we know? Because of Peter's response. Mark says Peter began to rebuke Jesus. And interesting, the word that Mark uses for rebuke is a word that's shown up in the Gospel of Mark already, in moments where Jesus casts a demon out of a person. Peter says, "Get out of here with this, Jesus." Like, literally, Peter is trying to cast the death out of Jesus. And Peter isn't just confused. Peter believes that Jesus is leading Peter in the wrong direction for his life. And this is where a bunch of us start negotiating too. Like, I'll follow Jesus as long as it leads me to victory and prosperity and success toward my agenda for life. But if it costs me a relationship, if it affects my plan for my life, Jesus starts talking about my money. If forgiveness feels unfair or obedience makes my life harder. See, the truth is, we want to live in resurrection power without crucifixion surrender. We want to live in resurrection power without crucifixion surrender. Peter says out loud what all of us are tempted to think. We want Jesus to support our empire. Jesus is inviting us into his kingdom. Look how he says it to Peter. They stop walking. And Jesus gets eye to eye with Peter, verse 33. When Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." And I don't know how you read this. Maybe you're tempted to read this in angry voice, like Jesus is red-faced, veins popping, screaming in anger at idiot Peter, and indirectly at you and me. I don't think that's what's happening here. He is rebuking Peter. He is rebuking you and me. But the question isn't, why is Jesus so angry? The question is, why is Peter's answer so dangerous? Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." And let's be clear, he's not saying that Peter is literally Satan. Not even saying that Peter is somehow possessed by Satan in this moment. Peter loves Jesus. He left everything for Jesus. He's followed Jesus. He just declared that Jesus is the Messiah. But in this moment, Peter is saying something that sounds an awful lot like what Satan has been saying from the very beginning. In Genesis 3, the original lie to the original couple was that the good life would be better without God in it. That God's commands were holding them back from life, the life they really wanted. In Mark 1, Satan told the same lie to Jesus. He offered him the kingdom without suffering, a crown without a cross, glory without humility. And now Peter's asking for the same thing. So think about that. Because he's not asking for something that registers with most of us as evil at all. He's not asking for a detour around the one woman, one man for life command. He's not asking for $1 billion, gajillion dollars that he can spend on whatever he wants. But Jesus says, you don't have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Peter's not thinking about drugs or crime or some kind of weird pagan worship. His concerns sound completely reasonable to us. He wants comfort. He wants security. He wants political victory. And he wants protection and success and reputation and influence and control. And the problem isn't that any of those are terrible things. It's that all of those are terrible kings. Thomas Jefferson took scissors to the Bible. Peter didn't need scissors. And you and I don't usually either. He just simply took the promises of the Messiah that he liked and either rejects or reprioritizes the things that he doesn't. And if we're honest, that tends to be our method too. So what's the invitation of Jesus for people like us? You see that in verse 33? What does he say? He says, get behind me. Notice that's not just a rebuke. It's also an invitation. Jesus doesn't say, get away from me. I'm done with you. Jesus doesn't say, get out of my sight. I'm disgusted by you. He says, Peter, get behind me, which is where followers belong. Jesus is saying, Peter, come on, man. You're trying to lead me. You're declaring you'll follow me as long as I follow you wherever you want to go. That doesn't work. Get behind me. And one of the highlights of my week every week during the school year is mentoring a soon-to-be second grader at South Hills Elementary with our Hero to Hero program. And this year it had me waiting in the hall for a few minutes before my guy got back from specials at a time when a bunch of the classes at South Hills were turning over. And one of my favorite things to do is to stand in the hallway and watch these classes walk by. Especially love to watch these kids walk by in line, and I especially love to watch the second or third kid in the line as the class walks by. They're the best, the second and third kid, because the second and third kid in line is the kid that wanted to be the line leader, but didn't get chosen to be the line leader that day. They always grab that second or third spot so they can keep an eye on the line leader to make sure the line leader doesn't get out of line. And one wrong move, man, out of the line leader, like one step in a direction or at a pace that number 2 or number 3 in line don't think that they're supposed to go, and they start chirping at the line leader. Or sometimes they just take over the spot, you know? At which point, usually the rightful line leader reminds them, hey, get behind me, Peter. And I feel like that's the way it tends to be with my life following Jesus. I mean, I know he's a better line leader. He's supposed to be the line leader. But I'm also pretty committed to make sure he leads the line exactly like I like the line to be led. That's what Peter's struggling with too. I bet it sounds at least a little familiar to you. The problem isn't that Peter stopped following. The problem is that Peter keeps expecting the leader that he's following to only lead him like he likes. So here's the question for us. Is there a spot in your life where you're trying to lead Jesus or expecting him to just follow you? Are you disappointed with Jesus because he's not leading with your timeline in mind? Trying to hurry him up or trying to delay his pace in a decision that you know he wants you to make? You're frustrated because a life of following is costing you more than you expected? Or do you find yourself consistently editing Jesus in your mind? Like, I know what he said, but here's what he really means. Are you asking him to bless a version of life that you've already decided to build? So the danger is not that we'd stop believing in Jesus. The danger is that we'll only follow Jesus towards the life that we've already decided to build for ourselves. The hinge point in this story is not just when Peter declares, Jesus, you're the Messiah. The hinge point in the story is when Peter begins to see the real Jesus does not plan to follow Peter's plan. And we know how the story goes. Like, the good news is Jesus is not finished with Peter's story here. Peter, at this moment, still sees trees walking around. He still doesn't understand the kingdom. He still wants a Messiah on his own terms. Peter's going to keep wrestling with this through the rest of the journey, through the cross, through the empty tomb, and honestly for the most of the rest of his life. But Jesus doesn't leave him. He keeps teaching him, keeps leading him, informing him, and transforming him. Did Peter like every second of the journey following Jesus from this moment? He absolutely did not. Would he trade a single step of it today? He absolutely would not. See, the question isn't if you've got Jesus completely figured out. The question is whether or not you're willing to follow him even when he's not willing to follow you. Because we will never become like Jesus if we only ever follow him where we like. And remember, Peter's the one narrating the story for Mark as his invitation on the other side of this moment too. That when we let Jesus lead, even through land we don't like, where what we see looks like trees, we always ultimately see that he's led us to life. Would you bow your head with me? Lord, I suspect that I'm not the only person in the room today who finds myself struggling with places that you lead that we don't like. And yet, Lord, we want to see, and we declare that we can't quite see like we feel like we will see. And we need you to lead us and to form us and to shape us and to show us who you are and invite us to follow you. Lord, I pray for the person that's here today that has never taken a first step towards following you, discovering who you are, that you came on a mission to suffer for their sake and for my sake, to take all of my shortcomings on your shoulders, to put them to death, to take them into an empty grave and to walk out of the grave without them, to offer us complete forgiveness and hope as a gift that costs us nothing. And I pray, Lord, if there's a person in this room that has never taken a first step and trusting you, that they would receive that gift right now, right where they sit, as simply as telling you, I'm trusting you, and not just expecting that I'm going to lead you to my life. Lord, for all of us, would we be people that follow, even when it's through land that we don't like, and to declare with our feet as well as our mouth that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, and we trust you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hey, thanks for watching. If something you heard resonated with you today, we would love to connect with you. Visit doxology.church/connect or leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's message and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.